Okay, great. Okay, welcome to Planning B, starting today. We'll do a bit of kind of housework first of all. We don't have any public participants today speaking, so it's just the councillors within the room. But I would like to remind people that if you have got mobile phones, to switch them off, and also just be considerate of other people speaking. And finally, to use your microphone and make sure that the green button is showing before you start speaking on the call. So first of all, I'd move us to declarations of interest, if anyone has anyone to raise today. Yeah, Councillor Waters.
Just to be completely open, you'll realise that I called in items D and E, but obviously I approached them with an open mind.
That's fine. Okay, if there's no other declarations of interest, then we'll move forward. So the next one is the minutes to approve from the last committee held on the 14th of June. Does anyone have any comments to make on those minutes? Yep, that's fine. Well then, we'll approve those minutes and move forward. Yeah.
I think we should note that there are apologies for absence from Councillor Wardby and I'm substituting, which is for public record. Thank you.
Thanks. And then moving on, we haven't got public participation today. There's no one coming to speak in public participation. And typically at this time, we'd normally remind people that they have 3 minutes to talk, but just to remind people watching and also here that we don't have any public participation on any agenda items. So as we move through those, we'll just move straight into the office presentation and then discussion after that as we move through. We have 4 applications today, and the first one we were looking at is Macmillan House. This is actually 2 applications, one for the application itself and full application, and one for the listed building consent. We will take them both together in terms of the discussion and the presentation, but then we will take 2 separate votes on those as we move it through as an item. Gareth, would you like to move on to the presentation?
Thank you, Chair. So 60 York Road, Acomb it's in the Acomb Conservation Area and is a Grade 2 listed building. On the screen there's a photograph, a Google Earth image. The building is a detached brick and render villa dating from the early 19th century. It's got these brick range extension out the back. It's currently in occupation as 17 bedsits, and the proposal in front of members is to convert the building into 8 flats and the erection of 2 bungalows to the rear. I'll just go through the presentation. So some more photographs. So there's a photograph from York Road of the frontage of the building and the rear of the building. The brick built extension, and then the garden area where the bungalows would be constructed. To the rear is that 2 or 1 bungalows in the back? So two bungalows to the rear. Built some time ago. This is the as existing site plan showing the host building in bedsit use, car parking area, and then the garden area to the far rear of the site, and more bedrooms on the first and in the roof second floor. It shows existing and proposed elevations externally, some minor elevations to the brick built rear range to introduce doors into the individual flats, giving them their own front door. It's the principal changes. No changes of any significance to the external envelope of the original listed building. And the ground floor site plan. So that shows the alterations at ground floor level within the listed building and the two bungalows to the north of the site with car parking to the rear, small patio gardens front and back for those two properties. First and second floor of the listed building. And elevations of the proposed bungalows. In terms of the listed building consent, the planning permission is recommended for refusal for the reasons set out on page 21, but your members have a tabled update where we're recommending some varied, perhaps expanded wording to refusal reason number 1 for the full application. In terms of the list of building consent, also recommended for refusal the reasons set out on page 37. That only relates to the internal alterations to the building itself. Principally, the concern is, let me just zoom in. There's the original servants' stair, which goes from the servants' accommodation, or originally would be servants' accommodation in the roof, down to the back of the first floor level. And the proposal truncates that stair and puts a turn in, so it becomes part of a flat which would cover part of the first floor, and then the 2 rooms in the top floor. And it's considered that loss of that legibility of the service stair by truncating it and taking it into that flat will be harmful to the historic character of the listed building. Furthermore, the other part of the refusal reason for the listed building is the insertion of the what's my pointer? The insertion of this block here for the entrance hall to that flat, and how that impinges on the significance of that formerly principal room, and we feel that causes harm to the internal layout of the listed building. So, as I say, both are recommended for refusal on the grounds set out in the report.
Right, thanks, Gareth. Before we move into discussion, got any questions for officers? Yeah, Councillor Fisher.
Thanks, Chair. On page 21, there's a slightly odd sentence which says the proposal would also fail to provide an adequate standard of amenity for prospective occupants. I presume that means would fail to provide an adequate standard of amenity. Is that correct? Would officers consider that to relate to the loss of the garden area? Because bearing in mind what it says on page 13, the premises are presently in use as a development of 17 one-bedroom bedsits subdivided by lightweight stoodwork partitions. Having lived in an accommodation like that, the standard of amenity is not good because soundproofing is almost non-existent. Does the objection relate principally to the loss of the garden area?
Yes, it does.
Thank you.
Okay, if there's no other questions being proposed, then I'd like to open up for discussion between members. This time, not looking for a proposer or a seconder, just initial thoughts and discussion that people wish to raise. If anyone has anything. Yeah, Councillor Waters.
Well, you said you were after a proposer, but I'd just like to propose that we go along with the officer's recommendation. Largely, in the interest of consistency with what we determined at the last meeting. We need to support what the officers are saying in relation to a Grade 2 listed building and compromising of the conservation area.
If there isn't any other discussion, then I'm happy to welcome a seconder. I mean, from sharing the same points as yourself, then yeah, I fully kind of concur with that situation and the fact that it's a very similar application to what was brought last time and turned down by the committee. And in terms of being consistent, then it's required that we kind of follow through with that as well. Yeah, Councillor Fisher.
Thank you. There is obviously some less than substantial harm to the setting of the listed building. That has to be offset by some significant public benefit. Whilst the bet sits are probably not adequate in terms of some terms, and the 8 apartments might be better, the loss of the actual accommodation, because some people will want the 1-bedroomed accommodation, it's affordable, and the loss of the garden, in my view, plus I think the inappropriateness of the bungalows, I think they're just inappropriate in that location. So I'm happy to second the recommendation for refusal.
Okay, well, in that case, if there isn't anything else that people wish to add, and Gary, if we can move us through to recommendation.
So the planning application is recommended for refusal for the revised refusal reason 1 as set out in the updates, and then second refusal reason is set out on page 21 of the agenda.
If I can see everyone raise hands for that being carried forward. Yeah, that's unanimous. Yes, indeed, I should find out myself. Yeah, in that case, that's unanimous. And Gary, if you could move through to the second recommendation for the listed building consent, please.
Chair, so the listed building consent is recommended for refusal for the reason set out on page 37 of the agenda.
And again, if I can see people raise their hands for moving that recommendation. Great, and again, that's unanimous. So we'll move on to the next item. I don't think we need a break there, so we'll just carry on through to the next item on the agenda. Yeah, okay, we'll give it 1 minute. Okay, so the next application that we're looking at is the Principal York Hotel on Station Road. And Gary, if you can take us through the presentation for that, please.
Thank you, Chair. So the Principal Hotel is in the Central Historic Core Conservation Area, in the railway sub area set out in the Conservation Area Appraisal. It's a Grade 2 listed building dating from the 1870s. It's also in the area of archaeological importance. The proposal is for a 4-storey extension providing 41 bedrooms and proposed reconfiguration of the car parking and landscaping. So on the screen behind me, you just pick out in green, that's the outline of the proposed extension, and this the blue hatched line shows the new reconfigured parking and front access to the site, and the area in purple is the area to be the moment it's set out as a sort of bound gravel surfacing, I believe, and used for pay and display car parking for the hotel, and that's to be removed from parking. Google Earth image. So the area that we're looking at in terms of the new build is here. To the northwest of the site, Lehman Road runs between the site and the post office, the Royal Mail office. You can see the existing extensive car parking on the front of the building, and then round the crescent of the road, there's a an access which is used on occasions, which gives access out onto Lehman Road. It's another image of the same Google Earth. So this area here is what we're looking at in terms of the location of the extension, and you can see the car parking. More photos, ground level shots. You can see the Royal Mail sorting office. So the building would go in this location. Again, from Station Road access. So most of this car parking would be removed, and the access road reconfigured, extension over in that location next to the 1912 catering building. This is Lehman Road. So, excuse me, I referred to the 1912 building, which is here on Lehman Road, just that corner of the yellow buff brickwork. Extension would be built here. I mentioned the secondary access to the site. It's just where that laser pointer is there behind the hedgerow. The existing site plan, just a slightly larger version of the one I showed as the first image. So this shows the area that will be taken over by car parking. Here's the extension, proposed extension. Existing ground floor plans and the existing roof plan. Existing elevation. So this is the elevation facing the gardens. The flank elevation, so looking along Lehman Road, and then this is the Lehman Road elevation. So the proposed site plan shows the extension. Principal extension is this 4-story block here, but it does have also an element that links through to the existing conference centre. You see the extent of the reduced car parking area here. The lower ground floor, so all the new build is this area. Ground floor plan, this shows the link through to the conference centre here. You can see the reception desk. First floor, second floor, principally bedrooms on these upper floors. Third floor plan, and then the roof plan. Elevation, so this is the front elevation facing onto the garden. The northeast elevation, so looking obliquely along Lehman Road. And this is the Lehman Road elevation, so the 1912 building there, and the proposed bedroom extension. Sections through. Facade detail. So this is just a blow up of one of the bays of the proposal, and showing how the window details would be constructed. Those windows are sort of deeply set into the recess created by these the brickwork detailing. And this is the landscape master plan. I think there was a question at the site visit yesterday. So the trees to be removed are shown as grey. These areas, new trees are shown principally in this area. Some around the entrance to the main hotel building, and then some feature trees. That's it. Yeah, so that's recommended for approval. The reasons are set there, the conditions are set out on page 58. There is a short update which is on the papers tabled in front of you. Natalie will just go through it now.
In terms of updates on this application, additional consultation response has been received from the landscape architect. We did receive this back in May, but unfortunately I just missed it out in the report. But the landscape architect notes the impact of the development is similar to the proposals that have previously been approved on this site, and that the planting plan revision A is acceptable, and these are reflected within conditions 6 and 7. In terms of waste storage and collections, the agent confirmed yesterday that the existing waste strategy for the site will be maintained, and the bins are collected from the service lift that opens up onto Station Road loading area. So this will remain as existing. The additional information and the consultation response has been assessed, and the officer's recommendation remains for approval subject to the conditions listed.
Thanks. Yeah, really helpful clarification on the waste that came up the other day. Has anyone got any questions for officers before we move into discussion on this? Yeah, Councillor Waters.
Just in relation to condition 7 on page 61, given that this is involving, if approved, loss of a lot of mature trees and the replacement landscaping is considered so important, I would have thought that this condition shouldn't be the standard 5-year one. We should be moving to the standard lifetime of the development, because for anybody that's new, in theory, these trees could be lost after 5 years. We need to put a stronger condition on them.
Yeah, just for my information, is that a condition we've applied on previous applications?
Yeah, and I did think we'd got it into the mindset of officers that it was becoming more the standard. So I'm quite surprised to see it on something like this, that we've slipped back into this 5-year business again.
Well, just, yeah, I know what you say, really. So we apply conditions on the basis of the scheme in front of us, sometimes 5 years, which is a government, it comes from the government standard conditions, 5 years, that we do apply, because then we have to have good reason to deviate from that, from those model conditions. But if members feel that there's a good reason why that should be in perpetuity, then that's a change you can make. I would say that once the trees would be protected by the conservation area status as well as the landscaping condition. So the condition covers trees and plants that die, and once they're established, they're protected by the fact certainly the trees are protected by the fact that they're in the conservation area. But it's a decision for you to make if you
well with respect, Gareth, you would have hoped that the existing mature trees that's been lost would have been protected, but they're not, and this just saves anything else coming up in the future. If it's linked with the new development, then nobody's going to touch this replacement landscaping.
Okay, the trees are protected as it stands at the moment. The planning permission, in the balance, recommends that they can be removed for this development, and the alternative planting would mitigate that loss. So they are protected. It's a decision of the authority to allow their removal.
Yeah, but again, with respect, if a condition's put on linking the new landscaping and the new trees with this development, it would become very, very difficult to ever remove them in the future.
Just to clarify for me, so if the new trees are planted, hypothetically, and they're not covered by a condition past that 5 years, but they are part of the conservation area, they would still require a planning application to remove them at that stage. Does that the conservation area offers that protection?
Yes, they would be, if they were proposed to be removed as part of another planning application scheme, then the grant of a planning permission which show the trees to be removed would give that consent. Alternatively, if they just wanted to remove them, I don't know, to do another planting scheme, for example, then they would need to to submit a 6-week notice to get the authority's approval, and potentially the authority could put a tree preservation order on them if they wish to retain them.
Okay.
But, yeah.
Okay, Councillor Fisher first, please.
Thank you. I appreciate what you're saying, but I don't think it covers, the conservation area covers if the tree dies. I have trees in my back garden which I have to prune because I'm in a conservation area, but if a tree dies, I don't have to replace it. Whereas this condition that they die or are to become diseased, that would cover the applicants having to replace them. I think it's important that we do incorporate the suggestion that Councillor Waters has made, because I think it covers the extra base.
I'll support that. My question relates to a different condition. I don't know if we're ready to move on, so, but I certainly support what Councillor Waters has said there.
Yeah, I didn't see any other hands for that issue, so if you want to move on to another question, that's fine.
Yeah, it's a related issue, really. It's about sustainability. Conditions 27 and 28. I'd like to understand why it is that we're giving a let out. We're requesting a reduction of 28% in carbon emissions and then saying, unless you don't want to, unless you can demonstrate you don't want to, by saying it's not viable. I'd like to understand the rationale for that. I don't really want to see that in these conditions. And I'm also minded, and it relates to condition 27 as well. If in other local authorities, to my knowledge, if an application fails to meet the carbon reduction standards required of it, they put in place Section 106 agreements, whereby the developer then has to pay a charge for having failed to meet the target they were given. And that money is then available to invest in improving energy efficiency of, say, council housing. That happens in several London boroughs. So I'm keen to understand why it is that we're not simply saying we want to achieve a 28% reduction, and if you don't, then we will want you to compensate through a Section 106 agreement or similar. I understand that you may say we don't have such a Section 106 agreement here as yet as part of our local plan, but the key thing is, why are we giving them an option not to achieve 28% reduction?
That's the way the policy is worded. So the policy is worded to require that 28% reduction compared to the requirements of the 2013 building regulations.
Yeah.
But it does say that unless it's demonstrated that it would not be feasible or viable, but then the applicant would have to demonstrate it. It's not that they don't want to; they may not want to, but they would have to show they'd have to show their workings out in terms of why they couldn't do it, or why it would make the scheme unviable. So it's not just a it's not just a rubber stamping exercise. We would require sufficient justification to allow them not to meet that standard. The policy doesn't have the policy also doesn't have that Section 106 sort of offsetting against other developments. It's just not part of our policy as it stands at the moment.
I understand it isn't part of our policy at the moment, and I hope once the local plan is adopted, we will shift all of this. But what I'd like to know is really, can we remove the unless it is demonstrated such reductions would not be feasible from this condition?
I'd say no, because that's what our policy says. And we should really, the idea of having the local plan is that it gives certainty to developers and certainty to people who are interested in developments in the city, and to sort of on an ad hoc basis say, well, we're not going to apply one part of the policy, but we're going to apply another part when there isn't really
anything particularly special that would on this site, which would say that we should split that policy in half, I'd say no. My recommendation.
Yeah. Councillor Orrell.
Got it. It was on number 27 condition. I agree with Councillor Bassey, and I think I'd like to test whether the applicant would actually not commit to that condition. And the question I was going to ask earlier was, we've been told many times that BREEAM can't be achieved because they haven't done the initial work on various aspects of it. Do we have any information of what they've actually done to date on BREEAM so that they do reach excellent?
Members will have picked up from the reports that this is a resubmission of a broadly the same scheme that was approved in 2015 and 2019. But the policy, the condition follows our policy. That policy is, the local plan is getting to a stage where it's very close to, hopefully being close to adoption. I'm difficult to say anything other than to members other than that we should follow the policy unless there's a good reason not to. It's unless material considerations indicate otherwise. And I don't think that happens in this case. I mean, it's the developer has to in both cases, if they don't meet BREEAM Excellent through their certification, they have to come back with a report demonstrating what remedial measures they have to do, and then undertake those remedial measures to the planning authority's approval. In terms of condition 28, again, they if they don't meet that, they can't meet that 28% reduction in carbon emissions over and above the requirements of the building regs. They have to come back to us and say why, and they have to reasonably prove that they're not viable or feasible. So it's not it's a get out clause in a way, but it's something that they have to demonstrate and prove before we would approve it.
But we don't have any information as to how prepared they are to achieve BREEAM. They don't have a plan that they've given us, that they've done X, Y, and Z so far, and plan to do the rest over time. Because they haven't done anything so far, they ain't going to get this to excellent.
In terms of sustainability reports, we have a brief section in the design and access statement on page 32, which addresses sustainability. And they're saying they're going to aspire to achieve BREEAM rating. They've suggested very good rating, but we added a condition which asks for excellent. So we're asking for more than what they want as part of their statement. But yeah, there's a small section in the design and access statement, but nothing further.
Councillor Bassey.
Just a supplementary point. We know they can reach 28% reduction. All they have to do is heat their building with renewable energy. So it just staggers me that we don't feel confident that we can ask for a new building built in 2023 to achieve this standard of carbon reduction.
I haven't got any more direct detail on this, but I remember having looked at quite a lot of different councils' local plans around this time when we were making additions to the local plan or making representations to the plan. And I can't think of any councils, unfortunately, that don't have an element of feasible or viable, a little bit like affordable housing, where there's an element of feasible and viable, and you have the same issue where everyone should be providing the policy level, but they don't always, because there's this allowance for feasible and viable, and I suspect that's in there for specific reasons, but unfortunately we don't have someone from the local plan team to confirm that here today as to why that wording's in there, but it is very much what's in the policy. So yeah, from my perspective, I can see why the condition stands as it is, even though it's not. They should be meeting that level quite easily, like you say. Do you have any other questions for anyone? Yeah, Councillor Malley.
Thank you, Chair. I just have a question about condition 26, about the site access from Station Road, and the it's a condition about replacing the drop vehicle crossover surface to replace it with Yorkstone paving. I was just wondering if you could tell us a bit about that and why that condition's there, please.
Yeah, so I think on this drawing. So this seems to be part of their proposals. I think it's probably shown on the first image. So I'm just the first and the last image. So let me just zip through. Yeah, so at the moment it's like a road junction. And what so you can just pick it out there, although it is in shadow. So a bellmouth curb. So what they're proposing, yeah, is it shown on there? No. Is more of a less road-like and more crossover-like in terms of its treatment. So I think that's probably it will probably feel more like you're continuing to walk along a paved footway rather than crossing over an access road into the hotel. So the condition, because it's part of the public highway there, is just to make sure we get those details right, in terms of something that will be part of the adopted highway. There's probably also, because they look like they're changing the positioning of that access, so there's probably bits of drop curb which will become redundant, that we just need to make sure that they are reinstated to a surfacing and a level that is appropriate for the public highway.
Is it usual to compel a developer to, condition the developer to do something outside of their boundaries?
If it's as a consequence of their development, then that's reasonable. Yeah.
Has anybody, maybe someone from Highways, commented on the suitability of Yorkstone for what is effectively going to be a roadway? Does it become broken or uneven under the weight of vehicles? It's usually used for pavements and pedestrianised areas.
So at 3.6 in the report, the Highways officer did actually recommend that specific material, and that was to be conditioned. So we secure that material. That's what Highways actually want.
So then if it does become broken or uneven due to vehicles driving across it for access to the hotel, it would become the local authority's responsibility to maintain that and repair that?
It would, but we would be also the approving authority. So I would expect that we would approve a specification that wouldn't be harmed in such a way. I think it's also the update, the most of the servicing doesn't take place from the front of the hotel. So this is a light vehicle route. The heavy lifting takes place from Teal Square at the rear of the hotel, where there's you can see on the You can see on the photograph, there's a lift and there's a red paved lay-by for servicing vehicles there. So that may well have some impact on the choice of paving for that area.
Yes, Councillor Valley.
Okay, so in that case, I have some supplementary questions about the waste collection and also vehicle turning, because I think, so you're saying that waste collection is done from the area that there's an image of in the officer update. I think isn't there a bin store close to the current access onto Lehman Road? Is that bin store being relocated, or is the waste from that bin store currently collected at the complete opposite side of the site, on the opposite side of the building, as that shows in this image? And that's continuing, or is that bin store being moved? And then the other kind of related question was, at the site visit, we were told there was space for vehicles, smaller vehicles like cars, to manoeuvre outside the main entrance to the hotel, and that the turning area at the end of the access road was for larger vehicles like delivery vehicles. But now you're saying that delivery vehicles don't use that as the access, they use the station road loading area as the access. In which case, what is the turning circle for at the end of the on-site vehicle access for?
Well, the turning head is to turn vehicles. It's a reasonable feature at the end of an access road, I guess. There's nothing at the moment in the conditions that obviously the hotel's historic. There's no conditions controlling the type of vehicles which go where they go. My response to that original question was that waste, when the heavy vehicles pick up from the back of the hotel, doesn't preclude them, and there's nothing to stop them going in to that main area. So I guess to that front area. So it would be sensible to have a turning. I don't think that undermines what I said about approving the specification of your stove for the frontage.
So yeah, because at the moment, smaller vehicles like vehicles dropping off people to the hotel quite often turn in the road immediately in front of the main entrance to the hotel. With the new planting, the new landscaping, will there still be space for that, or will those vehicle manoeuvres have to happen at the end of the access road in that turning space?
That certainly looks like the intention to me, that vehicles will be expected to go into the site and not be manoeuvring. There's no turning head. There isn't a turning head at the moment, but you can use the access into that parking area to turn, I guess. But you would have to go into the site.
I think at the moment, vehicles quite often, if they're dropping people off, arriving at the hotel, they turn around immediately in front of the entrance to the hotel, which is a little bit further up the access road, not right by the highway entrance.
Here. Yeah, I know there's still that apron there which would allow them to do that. I would imagine that the hotel would prefer if they didn't use that as a manoeuvring area and move on. A lot of these things are really up to the management of the hotel and how they wish their estate to be used. We wouldn't seek to, as a highway authority, we'd only seek to impose controls if they were creating problems around the entrance and on the public highway itself. I think it's rather up to the hotel's management to decide if they want taxis to carry on past the hotel and turn at the end. It does seem to be just looking at that plan, it seems to be a very conscious decision from the hotel. I mean, look at the photographs we showed earlier on, to move parking away from that principal entrance.
So highways haven't raised any concerns about space for vehicles to manoeuvre outside the entrance? Where there's pedestrian movements, pedestrian access to the hotel?
No, highways haven't objected in terms of the revised access and parking arrangements. I think just to add as well, the larger turning head at the end is larger for delivery vehicles because we can't control who's going to go in and out of that site. So we need to make sure that if by accident a large vehicle does go in, there needs to be somewhere for it to turn. But I'm not aware that a lot of vehicles use that entrance, delivery vehicles use that entrance, but just to make sure provisions made.
Any other questions before I move into discussion? No. Okay. Councillor Melly.
Sorry, Chair, just one more question, just to clarify about what harm is done to the setting of the walls, because there is a paragraph that explains what the view from the walls will be. Says that the new wing would be seen as subsidiary and separate to the hotel buildings, and that the roof level would be 2.5 main floors lower than the Klondike wing, but I couldn't see anything that kind of quantifies what harm that constitutes. Explains what the view is, but not what harm that view does.
So what part of the report is it, please?
It's paragraph 5.12. It just explains that the proposed development is visible from the city walls, and sort of describes what the view from the city walls would be, but doesn't quantify what level of harm it would do to the setting of the walls that I could see.
Personally, I don't think there's any impact on the setting, any harmful impact on the setting of the walls. There was an issue about views and the impact on the conservation area in terms of views from the city walls, and that's kind of summarised at the end of that. That section on page 51, where we conclude that, so the report concludes that the development will preserve the character and appearance of the conservation area and respect the listed building and its setting. So that's the overall conclusion. But yeah, my opinion is that there's not a harmful impact on the setting of the walls.
Okay. So welcome. Let's move into discussion now. People have things to raise around conditions, so move into discussion around that first, and then we'll move into proposals and seconders. Okay. Who'd like to start? Councillor Orrell.
Yeah, just coming back to the condition 27, and the officer saying that the applicant only wanted to get to very good, and we've pushed them to excellent. It's a bit worrying that they only wanted to get to very good. We're told we can't change that condition, but I think it will be useful for us, and I've said this before, that we pass all these conditions about environmental conditions, but we never really find out what has happened. So I think it would be good if we could get a report periodically on what has actually happened when developments have been completed. Those developments that have met the required conditions, and those that have failed and had to get dispensations, perhaps the right word. So I would hope that would happen in the future.
Yeah, I can understand that. Councillor Fisher, please.
Thanks, Chair. I'm going to formally move that if we do approve this application, condition 7 on page 61 be amended by the deletion of within a period of 5 years from the completion of the development, and adding at the end for the lifetime of the development.
Yeah, okay. This is, as I understand it, a condition that has previously been included on applications before, so I'm kind of pretty comfortable with that? Are we broadly in support of making that change as part of any recommendation that comes through if it's literally to approval? Yeah, okay, that's fine. I think we can include that within that. Does anyone have anything else discussion wise around conditions? Councillor Waters.
Well, with that in mind, then I'd just like to move the officer's recommendation. Personally, I think what's proposed is overbearing. I don't like the appearance of it, but because it's been similar proposals have been approved twice in the past, the committee's hands are tied, basically. So just move the officer's recommendation with the amendments to condition 7.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. Does anyone else have anything to add, or would anyone like to second that? Yeah, Councillor
Nobody
Fisher.
else will. I will. It seems like a double act here, but yeah, I'm quite happy to do it. I supported the previous one. I think this is marginally improved. I think there are less rooms, and I'm sorry about the loss of trees, but they are being replaced. I think if the last one was acceptable, this one certainly is.
Great. Yeah, I mean, I'd ditto those comments. I think it's an application that's suitable for what it's doing. In that case, then, Gareth, can you please take us through the recommendation considering that change around the condition to number 7?
Thank you, Chair. So the application is recommended for approval, subject to the conditions on page 58 onwards, as amended by members in respect of the wording of condition 7 on page 61 of the report.
In that case, can I see hands in the air for moving that recommendation? Again, that's that one. Yeah, I think that is one more. And anyone against the recommendation, and anyone to abstain the recommendation? That's one. Okay, in that case, it is moved, and we'll move on to the next item. We'll just take a quick 5-minute break there before we do the last 2 applications and take a quick pause, if that's okay. Thanks. Okay, so welcome back. The next application that we're looking at is 129 Osbaldwick Lane, which is a full planning application. And if you can take us through that, Gareth, as a presentation.
Thank you, Chair. So this planning application is for a single-story rear extension and rear dormer to number 129 Osbaldwick Lane, which is a two-story mid-terraced house with rooms within a converted loft. It's an existing HMO. It has a certificate of lawfulness establishing that use. It's considered to be within the C4 use class. It's also a licensed HMO for 5 occupants. The property is this one in the terrace, just in the middle of that terrace. There's quite a long garden with a flat roof double garage to the rear, and then this unmade track. And beyond that, there's Osbaldwick Beck and the Scout headquarters and Derwentthorpe beyond that. From the rear, see it of note, some existing dormers in the terrace on to the site here. See the roof light window for the existing loft conversion, and the extent of the proposed extension, this flat roof element here, which is currently a bathroom, and then this lean-to link that goes into the existing kitchen. Photograph from the front, photograph from the rear, so the element that's to be extended outwards and upwards. And then the proposed drawings. So here's the as existing drawings. So the extension to the rear, you see this hatched area, is the extent of the proposal at ground level, and that pretty much squares off that section, raises the roof level by about 0.4 of a metre, keeps this the sloping roof feature where it hits the existing two-story. Sorry, that'll be just there. And then it's a standard box rear dormer to the rear. That's it. So there is a written update, tabled update in front of members. BAT report has been submitted by the applicant. The property has been subject to a property survey and an emergent survey. The building, and in terms of the property survey, the ecologist assessed the building as low suitability for roosting bats, and then the emergence survey didn't spot any bats coming in and out. So their assessment was the property doesn't support bat roost, and the impact on roosting bats from the extension of the new dormer is considered to be negligible. We have a further letter of objection that was commenting that waste had been left out to the rear of the property. So in the back lane here, and there are a couple of photographs showing waste piled up to the rear. The applicant did say that was from the tenants moving out of the property and that it had been cleared. So the application is recommended for approval, and the conditions are set out on page 99 of the report.
Thank you, Gareth. Is there any questions for Gareth? Start with Councillor Waters, please.
Just for clarification for everybody, this bat survey thing, to my mind, it was quite critical. Is the planning department now working a consistent standard with planning application validations as regards requesting bat surveys? The reason this came about was the parish council had put in a planning application to demolish a single-storey building at the side of the village hall, and were required to carry out a bat survey for a building that was completely unsuitable for bats prior to the application being validated, which we duly complied with. And then I was amazed to see this application validated and proceeding through the system without a similar requirement, bearing in mind, because of what was proposed, it would have been more likely to have caused disturbance to bats than the parish council application. So that's the first question, Gareth. Are we now working to a consistent standard for validations?
We're in discussions with the ecologist of how to approach this. I mean, traditionally, the issue we had was a lot of roof extensions were permitted development. So this one, for example, if it were just a dormer proposed, then it'd be a permitted development scheme. That in its own right doesn't override the law relating to bats and protected species. So we're trying. We're still in discussions of how best to approach householder applications in terms of potential impact on protected species and how to approach that. I haven't come to a conclusion yet, but your comments and the comments you've made have been noted and discussed between officers and the ecologist.
The second question I've got is in relation to paragraph 5.6 on page 98. I'm particularly worried by the sentence that says the floor plans show 5 bedrooms, but the property could be lawfully occupied within the planning use class by 6 residents. Now, potentially in the planning use class, yes, but the council issued the certificate of lawful use on the 30th of December 2020, and it stated, the lawful use is that of a small house in multiple occupation for up to 5 residents within the use class C4, up to 5 residents. Now, the concern is that with the various bits and pieces going on here, it increases the capacity of this property that's already causing angst and problems to surrounding neighbours. Can you just explain the disparity between the sentence in 5.6 and the actual certificate of lawful use that was issued?
So with a certificate of lawfulness, the applicant has to demonstrate why the certificate should be granted with evidence. So, and the guidance in the government guidance states that we should be very precise in the certificate in terms of certificating what they have shown. But once that certificate has been granted, so presumably when the information was submitted, they could demonstrate that it had been let out to 5 residents for a period of 10 years or more. But once that certificate is granted, if what has been established falls within a use class, the fact that the certificate was granted on the basis of 5 doesn't then restrict it within the use class. So, and exactly, if it's not a good example now because the use classes have changed, but in the days when shops were a use class A1, you might submit details in support of your certificate which showed it to be a flower shop, and we would grant a certificate saying it's a flower shop. But if someone then came along and used it as a newsagent shop, showing me age now, then that wouldn't be a change of use because it was all in the same use class. And so that's what's happened here. They're required to provide evidence
we issue the certificate on the basis of the evidence that's produced. But then that doesn't stop it from having permitted development rights and, you know, those occupancy limitations set out in the use classes order. So it could, under C4, be occupied by 6.
Which of course is more likely when it gets more room to expand, should this application be approved.
Potentially, at the moment it's licensed 5. It has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bedrooms. I don't think those bedrooms are subdividable, and you know, I guess it's not their proposal. And if they were to put a corridor in the lounge, I don't know if that would make the lounge then too small to be used as a bedroom, because there are licensing requirements over the size of bedrooms. But yeah, a double occupancy of one of the rooms is reasonable and allowable. Again, subject to licensing criteria. If it's a double occupancy, you need a bigger room.
Councillor Orrell, I think, was first.
Thank you. Condition 3, Gareth. It says the materials for the dormer, which are permitted development, of course, have to comply. Can we put a condition on for when it's permitted development?
It's
not just this one, it's happening since
Yeah.
the rules were relaxed. It's happening a lot that we're getting bigger dormers.
I think case law says that if the development is done as one operation, then you can't kind of pick and choose and say, I'm building that as, whilst you're building the ground floor, I'm building the first floor, and saying, well, that's permitted development and that's under the planning permission. I think it's all covered by the planning permission. It would only be permitted development if it was done independently. And the condition, kind of a nod to the fact that it would be permitted development. That follows the wording of the permitted development conditions, which don't require matching materials. They require materials to be of a similar appearance. And I guess if it was clad in dark grey cladding, that would be acceptable.
But if it wasn't part of another of the full application, could we put conditions on?
Well, we wouldn't have the planning and application in front of us, but they would have to comply with similar wording in the permitted development right is granted subject to conditions. So they would have to follow.
Thanks.
Yeah. It has to have something, or potentially they can, clad it in white, pink, or whatever colour they choose.
Councillor Fisher.
Thank you, Chair. Mine is really a supplementary to what Councillor Waters was bringing up. Now, clearly at the moment, this has 5 bedrooms and is capable under the C4 use class of having 6 occupants. So it does mean that a couple could occupy one of the rooms if they chose to, and that would be legitimate, correct? If the applicants decide to convert one of the communal rooms, possibly the lounge or this new extension, which is now the sort of kit dining area, into a habitable bedroom, would they have to come back to this committee to apply for planning permission to do that?
No, but they would have to. They would have to vary the license. The license is for 5, but that's obviously a different process, different considerations.
Councillor Waters, please.
Just going on to paragraph 2.2, page 96, and bearing in mind the existing problems with this property, which largely centre around waste disposal. and the problems caused to surrounding neighbours, especially when waste is left out, heaped up in bin bags alongside a beck where there's rats, foxes. Could anybody tell me how the council's work to secure a development that will improve the economic, social and environmental conditions of the area? Because I don't think you'll find any neighbours that would support that statement with regard to this.
Well, my view is that it doesn't adversely impact the appearance of the property, the appearance of the appearance of the area, and it improves the living conditions of the property in its own right. That's my view. We have no control over. It's an existing. The property at the moment is an existing house in multiple occupation. Can't retrofit conditions by trying to control things like waste storage or cycle storage or things like that when on its face there's no increase in occupancy which would hang such a condition on.
I could argue all afternoon, but I won't though.
Councillor Melly.
So, because there is currently a cycle and refuse store as part of the property, but is the retention of that not currently conditioned as part of the existing permission?
No, the existing it has a certificate of lawfulness because someone's come to us seeking to establish what their lawful use of the property was. So there's no planning permission at the moment. So at the moment there's the double garage at the back of the property, and that's it.
So, because usually if we were granting an HMO application, we would look at conditions to do with cycle storage, refuse storage, and number of car parking spaces. But you're saying we can't do that because we can't retroactively add those conditions to an existing HMO.
Yes, this
Right.
is an application for extensions to the property,
You see, thanks.
and those we have granted those permissions in the past where they've clearly been extending, clearly adding bedrooms through the scale of the extensions proposed, but that's not the case here.
Councillor Bassey.
Just to follow up, make sure I've understood what's just been said here. Is the proposed extension going to result in the loss of bin store and cycle provision, cycle storage provision?
No.
No, it isn't. Okay, thank you. I just wanted to understand that. And the second thing is just for clarification. At the start, Councillor Waters said, raised the issue of the BAT survey. And I just want to make sure I've understood going forwards. If I understood your answer, Gareth, there isn't a requirement that all applications should provide a BAT survey, or is that correct?
It is in our validation checklist, which we're currently working on a revised version. It's one of the things to look at, even for a property, even for a proposal which impacts on the roof of an existing residential property. How it's applied hasn't been. That's not applied in every case for the reasons that the issue of permitted development rights and things like that. There's nothing in the law which suggests it should be provided. It should be it should be applied differently in terms of different types of property. Yeah, it's something we're getting to grips with, because it's certainly when the validation requirements they are applied in terms of what the impact of each development. So you have to have that sort of quick look at it when it first comes in, because we've got this 3-day period to turn them around, and you make a decision on what that application needs. And as Councillor Waters pointed out, in this case, seemingly similar developments in close proximity got a different answer. That's something we have to address.
Okay.
Not sure that's wholly answered your question.
Yeah, would I be right in thinking that this could form part of the SPD on biodiversity that is being developed and presumably will be advanced once the local plan's accepted, in the same way that all developments could require a SWIFT box to be, all new developments to have a SWIFT box?
Yeah.
Could it form part of
Yes, it could. I mean, the first stage is to, in terms of the validation requirement list, is to make a firm decision of how it's approached, and then roll it out on all applications to which is relevant. But yes, certainly SPDs can fill in those gaps in terms of what's required, and in circumstances, perhaps circumstances like this requiring back boxes and SWIFT boxes and whatever.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I guess my point is would be, I mean, it's clearly a developing situation in terms of how we deal with that surveys as part of applications. Perhaps it's something that can be brought back to committee members as an update once we've developed that a bit further. Just something informal. Does anyone have any further questions at this stage? No. And in that case, we'll move into discussion. If anyone would like to start us off. Councillor Waters.
Well, seeing as nobody else is willing, I knew when calling this one in, it would be very difficult to get any meaningful reasons for refusal. But I always pledge that anything to do with HMOs will be called in and dealt with in public for the people in Osbaldwick, because our community is being changed beyond all recognition. This is quite clearly going to result in increased occupancy of this property, if, or more likely when, it's approved. That increased occupancy will lead to increased disturbance and increased problems for the neighbours. So I'd be failing in my duty if I didn't bring it here.
Yeah, that's fair. Councillor Melly.
Didn't have my hand up, but happy to talk. Always happy to talk. Yeah, I mean, I think even if we didn't grant this extension, the property owner could still apply to increase the HMO licence to 6 occupants if they wanted, and I'm not sure there'd be grounds to refuse that. It seems to me there's adequate space, and we heard it just at the last meeting that lack of amenity space and that sort of thing isn't reason to limit the numbers within a use class, and this one has a lot more bedroom space and shared amenity space than other recent applications. So I'm not sure that increase in potential increase, not even definite increase, from 5 to 6 occupants is actually entirely relevant to this extension application. I'm happy to I've lost track where we got to. Propose, second, the officer recommendation for approval.
Yeah, Councillor.
Happy to second. It's quite a minor application.
Fine. Well, in that case, we'll move forward. Taking through the recommendation, please, Gareth.
So the application is recommended for approval. The conditions outlined on page 99 of the agenda.
So can you see there's hands for moving the approval? Those who'd like to abstain and those who are against. On that basis, then we'll move it for approval and we'll move on to the next item from that. So the final one is number 9, St Mary's Grove, also in Osbaldwick. It's a full application for the change of use from a dwelling to a house in multiple application. Can you take us through that, please, Gareth?
So 9 St Mary's Grove is a semi-detached house in Osbaldwick. This planning application seeks change of use to an HMO within the C4 use class. This property it's has been extended, ground floor, converted garage here, and this sort of wraparound extension as well at ground floor level. And the roof, as you saw from that photograph, roof extension with a dormer, flat roof dormer, and a dormer to the side as well. The applicant submitted this parking plan, but comments from our highways team said that I'll go back a step. From previous applications that members might have considered, you're aware that we require HMO parking to provide independent parking spaces so that all of any cars parked can move independently and not require you to find one of your housemates to move their car. We also seek and have been successful in seeking, when this has gone to appeal, larger than normal parking spaces. So comments from our highways team basically say that this is impractical when you look on the ground in terms of the space that is available to manoeuvre. So in accordance with our Appendix E car parking guidelines, which once were standards, but they're getting old now, so I prefer to refer to them as guidance. We would normally require a maximum of 1 parking space per 2 bedrooms. So on the basis that you could only reasonably fit 2 cars on that frontage and operate them independently, we're suggesting that there's a limit to the numbers in terms of occupancy of the property, which is in condition number 4. Applying that condition, we do need to look at the situation in the street, and it doesn't actually show it particularly well. It's a narrow street. It is already subject to cars parking on the pavement. It's quite a short cul-de-sac, so there isn't really the opportunity for sort of overspill parking to take place on the highway. But otherwise, the application is recommended for approval, subject to the conditions on page 111 and 112.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions? Starts off, Councillor May.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, if the car parking guidance for HMOs refers to bedrooms and is guidance about having car parking space for every 2 bedrooms, then what's the justification for limiting the number of the number of people based on the parking provision?
That's It does, the report, I did notice this actually, the report does move from talking about bedrooms to talking about people. I guess if you are limiting it to 4 bedrooms, then potentially you can have 6 occupants, which negates the condition. But yeah, that is a reasonable point. That the standard talks about bedrooms, which suggests that condition 4 should be referred to as no more than 4 bedrooms, rather than no more than 4 tenants. So it's possible for the rooms to be double occupied, certainly allowable. I think, and I have absolutely no evidence one way or the other, but I would imagine that it's actually doesn't actually happen that often in terms of these shared, more likely to be student houses. But yeah, it is a possibility that that if we put a condition on about bedrooms, then you would end up with the same situation in terms of potential for cars. Because what you can't do is put a condition on saying, I think a condition saying no more than 2 cars just then results in the potential for overspill parking onto the street. So yeah, approaching it from the occupancy of the house is really the only way we can try and seek any control.
Yeah, no problem.
Paragraph 5.10 talks about amenity space and how how that meets the needs for the potential of up to 4 occupants. What policy is that based off? What policies do we have about minimum standards or levels of shared amenity space that are required for HMOs?
Yeah, we don't have a policy which policy H8 in the emerging draft plan talks about the accommodation provided is of a high standard, which doesn't detrimentally impact on residential amenity. But then in the explanation to the policy, it talks about the dwelling being large enough to accommodate an increased number of residents. So I think that's a comment on that particular part of policy H8. Policy H8 goes, and that justification goes a bit wider. It talks about the dwelling being large enough for the increased number of residents, and then sufficient space for cars to park, sufficient space for cycle parking. The condition of the property is a high standard. Sufficient storage space. So it's a one-line assessment of those issues in 5.53 of the emerging plan. There's a lot of potential storage space. For example, some of the bedrooms aren't big enough for to be licensed as HMO bedrooms. And then it's got a reasonably sized garden, existing shed, reasonably sized front forecourt area. There's nothing inherently that says that's not a convertible property for a shared house for an HMO.
Yeah, Councillor Bassey.
Just developing that, what we're looking at, there's no immediate on-street parking next to this property. The report says a maximum of 2 cars could go there, and therefore only 4 bedrooms. But our previous application, we heard how 5 bedrooms can become 6 bedrooms. I'm a little concerned as to the power of any recommendations here to say 4-bedroom HMO. How likely is it that this can be defended and not become a 6-bedroom HMO in 2 years' time, given that what we already see are significant parking issues?
The condition is enforceable. In terms of occupancy, it's not the most straightforward condition to enforce, because we would have to seek tenancy agreements and access to the property, but we have powers under the Planning Acts to do that. If it's brought to our attention that there are more occupants or more bedrooms than the condition allows. What the condition doesn't do is prevent 4 occupants from owning 4 cars. It's unlikely. The evidence that we have is that that's not normally the case in terms of students and car ownership. But you know, that's the same with any developments, and our parking guidelines, you know, tread a path between likelihood and avoiding, mitigating against harm to parking and residential means in the area.
Councillor Waters, please.
I'm sorry, Gareth, I can't accept that. The reality on the ground is that there's always more cars than what you allow for. There's always more cars than what the council assess. Always. I was quite encouraged when I saw the condition when it's brought it down to occupants rather than bedrooms. So I certainly hope that isn't going to be watered down at all. It does concern me that once again, an application like this is up for approval largely based on the percentage figures. Percentage figures that are usually just a guesstimate. I think the licensing regime is now flushing out an awful lot more that the council didn't have recorded. But there are a lot of other factors that members ought to be considering rather than just a simple percentage, especially when it's at the end of a cul-de-sac. I think we've discussed the car parking and the problems that 1 or 2 displaced cars would cause in this area. But you've also got, and I'll read through some of these, the change of use and increase in number of residents will not result in the loss of a front garden for hard standing and parking and refuse areas, which would detract from the existing street scene. Yes, as everybody can see from the photos, it's already hard standing for parking. But what most of the residents in that street fear is that the tree, which is a significant part of the street scene, would pretty soon come down. We've been on to the tree officers at the council, landscape people, and nobody will put a TPO on it. So I'm asking if there's any planning condition that could be put on that if the front garden was used for parking, that the tree was retained. I don't know whether members are minded that way. The usual issue that neighbours have with these properties is the increase in comings and goings and noise levels. Well, I think you all need to be made aware that the back garden shares 4 common boundaries with other residents' back gardens. And given the problems that I've encountered over the years in dealing with these type of properties, that's 4 residents that could well likely be disturbed with late night parties and God knows what else over the years. I was encouraged to see that there's a condition there about waste storage cannot come forward of the line of the property. But I think we've got a condition on about refuse and recycling facilities, it's a similar condition to what's gone on in the past for other HMO approvals. And what I did find when questioning these in the past is there's no compulsion on anybody to use, to actually use these facilities. So I think we need to be looking at different wording on conditions like this. I'd like to think some of you would stand up and try and refuse this on some of the other aspects rather than just simply go with the easy one, which is to say it's under the street level and neighbourhood thresholds, which if you actually read that paragraph, 2.3, yes, regrettably, this was discussed in September 2022 at the local plan examination, and there was no proposed modification to policy H8. The modification that was proposed at full council in December 2021, which was to halve these percentages, because the will of full council at the time was that the percentages were far too high. That spent over a year being continually frustrated by the last administration, who just didn't want to bring that reduction in. And as I tested at the examination, the local plan inspectors were quite content to accept a modification from the council, but it never came. So if any of you are concerned that the HMO percentages at street level and neighbourhood level are too high, then now's an opportunity to refuse one. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks. Just there was a question there around the tree situation with the trees and condition of it. Is there a condition that could be applied around that tree at the front? Does it sit within the application boundary if people are interested in taking it up? That was.
It is within the application boundary. But consider how reasonable it is to pose that condition. Yes, because there's no additional works. As far as I'm aware, there's no additional works surrounding the tree. So we want to protect this one over and above any of the tree that particular street on this application. I think we have trouble with evidence. And then if it does get taken down, you have the condition that says you can do that. Yeah, it's that. You know, is it necessary? This there's a test of reasonableness. Is it necessary? Is it based to be non-proposed? All other respects. I think if we had felt that, we would have recommended. Sorry, yeah, so I doubt whether it's reasonable.
Councillor Fisher.
Yeah, if you actually look at the applicant's proposed car parking, which we have said is inadequate, one of the problems was the car that would be parked closest to the front of the site would have difficulty reversing to get out the narrow access. If they were to knock that front wall down and remove the tree, they'd have a lot easier job in justifying more car parking spaces at the front, and that could lead to an increase in the number of occupants they could have in the house in the premises.
Councillor Waters.
Just draw your attention to paragraph 2.9. Supplementary planning document outlines that in assessing planning applications for HMOs, the council will seek to ensure that the change of use will not be detrimental to the overall residential amenity of the area. I don't think anybody could argue that if that tree is lost, it is detrimental to the residential amenity of that area.
I don't. I think you're broadening what the the intention of the SPD to cover things that weren't. If the proposal was to, if there was an existing landscape front garden which was proposed to provide the car parking by paving it over and propose taking trees out, then that might be something that line of the SPD would be designed to cover. But that doesn't seem to be that doesn't seem to be the case here. There's no. They're not proposing anything that removes the tree. If they remove the tree in the future, that's the same rights that exist for anyone to remove any tree in their garden, which isn't subject to protection either by being in a conservation area or being subject to a tree preservation order. I think it goes. It's like any condition. Ultimately, it's how it's tested and how it's felt, how it's considered in front of an inspector or in front of the courts. But I think my reaction is that it wouldn't be a reasonable condition.
Well, thank you, Chair. Just to endorse from a legal perspective what Gareth is saying, I think that the committee chair would be going awry were it to seek to impose such a condition to require a householder to retain a tree as part of a change of use application. Seems to me to be onerous and that would not meet the 5 legal tests for a condition, in my view.
Thank you. Councillor Walters.
Sure as night follows day, it'll be chopped down. And I think it's time we did test things like this. It's probably a damn sight more reasonable trying to secure the retention of a mature tree like that than putting conditions on planning approvals for cycle parking at old folks' homes. I think it's worth testing.
Okay, Councillor Rowley.
I'm not sure whether we're in discussion or
this is questions still. We're trying to stick to questions.
we've been in discussion for some time, I think. I tend to agree with that. I suspect when we get the new SPDs with the local plan, trees will be more protected than they have been in the past. So trying to protect trees now goes with the flow of what's been happening in recent years. That trees have become more important to people. Do you want to discuss or not?
Yeah, well, if no one has any more questions or they've got specific questions to ask at this time, then let's move into discussion. If you'd like to start us asking you for all the discussion.
Yeah, just to say that we have many applications for HMOs. One of the things that I always considered is important is the amenity of local residents. And that is particularly affected by the width of the road or the roads that are in the vicinity. And this is, like many other HMOs that we've had applications for, a very narrow road. And for me, that is always one of the very important aspects. So I don't think I can support this in this particular instance.
Okay, Councillor Vassy.
I tend to agree. The main picture you've showed us actually shows a vehicle parked in a place where it would plainly cause problems to other people. And it doesn't take much to imagine that that could happen on multiple occasions. I'm sure all of us as councillors come into contact with residents who struggle because of parking immediately outside a property that actually denies them access to their property. And I am concerned seeing this at the bottom of a cul-de-sac on a narrow road. With all that's said here, it seems that the report is falling over itself, trying not to say no, but at the same time saying there's not room for more than 2 vehicles. There shouldn't be more than 4 people living here. It's aware of the problem. And the discussion we've had about the tree exemplifies the same problem. And it may well be the case we're advised that we can't protect the tree. But I think we can see from the discussion that it seems all but inevitable that once this is agreed, then the next step for the applicant may well be to say, let's get rid of the tree, let's make more parking space. It just seems self-evident that this is ripe for problems in a narrow residential street. We can't always say no to these things. We can't have blanket yes and no's. This one here, I have to say, leaves me with considerable misgivings about the impact it would have, and I tend to agree with Councillor Orr.
I'm just going to follow on. So yeah, I mean, it's an application that I think the bit that I struggle with is what the reasoning that you'd hang a refusal on. And I think that's something that we'd have to think very strongly about in terms of what the specific reasoning is for hanging a refusal on it. But there's a lot about it that isn't very comfortable for approving. Things like the study downstairs, which is almost certainly a bedroom, and then the storage upstairs, which is unlikely to be a storage. And there's all sorts of parts of it that it's not really a 4-bed house. It's just a house that's been limited to 4 beds, but our powers to limit that quite hard. But what I'd say is if people in the group are wanting to turn it down, then we think clearly about what you're turning it down on in that respect. Councillor Melly, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. No, I was just going to say that I think a lot of the concerns that I've heard people express about noise, comings and goings, parking problems, in my view, aren't related to the C4 use class. They're related to the size and location of the property. And given the size of the property and the layout of the property, if you know, the proposed if it was used in the C3 use class, it could be inhabited by a large family, you know, many more than 4 people. It could be a much larger family with much more coming and going, much more noise. If it was occupied by a family, you know, with, you know, nuclear family, 2 parents, 2 children in their late teens or early 20s, there could be 4 cars in the property. And I think a lot of these concerns about, yeah, noise and parking are related to the property as, you know, in the state, the property as it is, rather than the use class that it would hold. And I think, yeah, so I can't see any basis to refuse the application for the change of use class. And I can't really see any policy basis or the reasonableness or necessity of limiting, you know, having the condition that limits it to 4 tenants. I just don't see what, you know, we've heard from a previous application, you know, in this very meeting that we have to add conditions based on policy. And I don't see what policy that comes from on the basis of parking or amenity space. That was all I wanted to add to the debate.
I mean, I think we're going to have to test the vote on this one before we can take it any further. So can anyone, is anyone into, oh, sorry. I thought you were saying something. I thought you were interjecting. Have we got anyone to propose to move the motion to a vote? Councillor Waters and anyone.
Right, well, I'll quite happily.
Sorry, move the recommendation, sorry, first. Yeah, that's what we're seeking. Yeah.
Could I move the recommendation, but with an amended condition to change, instead of the condition limiting it to 4, sorry, I've lost condition, occupants or residents, whatever the wording is, changing it to 4 bedrooms?
4 bedrooms rather than 4 occupants.
Yeah, 4 bedrooms rather than 4 tenants.
Yeah, people supportive of that. Would anyone like to second that?
Take one step back, please, Chair.
Yeah.
You rightly pointed out that any decision we make has got to be supported in policy terms. It seems to me, if there is a policy term here, the policy is that is found in 2.9. change of use will not be detrimental to the overall residential amenity of the area. And I think what's been rehearsed in a lot of different ways over the past 20 minutes have been concerns about potential impacts this particular proposal might have on residential amenity of the area. Can I just check with officers that I'm understanding that correctly and that that is a position that is defendable?
Yeah, I think the procedure is that we have to vote on the recommendation. And then,
Oh, before we do what I've
Yeah.
suggested. Okay.
Yes, the chair, yes, that's right. That's usual protocol is to seek to vote initially on the officer recommendation if that's seconded, needs to be seconded.
Yeah, Councillor Ollier.
So we're saying then that condition 4 is in effect a typo, and we're just amending a typo, guys.
It's something which I only picked up very close to the start of the meeting, so I haven't had the opportunity to fully think it through. I think the conversation we had about it was the Appendix E guidelines talk about bedrooms. Where is that? Yeah, 5.7. So that talks about 1 parking space per 2 bedrooms, and then the discussion flips to discuss the number of people. But this is because this is quite a tight site, and the offsetting of parking onto the road isn't really an option, which it usually is when the roads are wider and have more capacity. So trying to if you restrict it to 4 bedrooms, that doesn't necessarily restrict the number of people below the level that can occupy a C4 dwelling, and that might be why the wording has then moved into 4 people, because that is more likely to then control the number of cars which are generated by people rather than bedrooms. But yeah, ideally I would have had longer to think about that one.
Is this a question related to this, Mark?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
I'll phrase it as a question to Gareth. It's a great pity that nobody progressed with no car tenancy agreements as conditions. If you remember, I brought that up a couple of years ago.
That wasn't a question, that was a statement.
Well, do you agree that it's a great pity that nobody progressed with no car tenancy agreements? I brought up.
So ask me if I agree or not. It's not within our policy to seek that as it stands at the moment, or coming through in the draft local plan. So I recommend in accordance with policy.
Councillor Ollier.
I'm struggling then, because I'm not sure whether the intent of the writer of the report was for tenants or for bedrooms. So I'm struggling to come to a view on whether I'd support a change, unless there's, I guess, a definitive view on what it should have been. Or what we would normally have in this situation. Because it seems a bit of a sort of flip of the coin whether it's 4 or 6 occupants.
Well, if you follow the parking guidelines in Appendix E, then it would be bedrooms. And there is nothing in Appendix E which suggests otherwise. In terms of the policy just, and it's not actually, the policy wording just talks about the accommodations of a high standard which does not detrimentally impact on residential amenity. Policy doesn't say anything about car parking, except in the explanation to the policy. And then it just talks about there is sufficient space for potential additional cars to park. I guess a lot of cars, if a use of an HMO at this property resulted in a lot of cars, then there would be an impact in the street, which would have an impact on residential amenity. Hence the condition. The condition limiting the number of tenants is more logical if you are looking to reduce the potential for a larger number of cars to be provided, because it restricts from the maximum number of 6 people that could live there. It doesn't follow the guidance in Appendix E, but Appendix E is very old. So I guess my advice is the wording of that condition as written on page 112 is more likely to limit the number of cars that may be present at the property than putting bedrooms in. I'm not sure that's an approach we've had before.
I was just going to ask. I was going to ask Councillor, you put forward the proposal to change the word. Are you happy, having heard what Gareth said, to take it forward without the change to the condition now?
I'm going to stick with what I've proposed.
Okay. Is there a seconder with that proposed wording? Okay, that one falls back. We're back to the same position before in terms of seeking somebody to propose and second if you want to take this forward as a vote. Yeah, that's where we are. I guess there's still a challenge for me in terms of where do we find ourselves once we take it forward for a vote, but we cross that when we get there.
Thank you, Chair.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, sorry, go on.
Well, I suppose no one has technically moved yet the officer recommendation.
Yeah, sorry, that's
Is that what you were?
Yeah, sorry, that's what I
you're
meant to be
ahead of me.
asking. Yeah,
Sorry.
to move the officer recommendation. Yeah.
Thanks, Chair. I will move the officer recommendation with condition for as it is. I don't particularly like the application, but I just cannot think of a single reason that will stand upon appeal to refuse it. And I have a lot of sympathy for what several people have said here, but I just cannot see how we would defend it on appeal. So I'll.
And anyone second that so that we can move it? Yeah.
Yeah, happy to second on that basis.
Okay, thank you. Gareth, can you take us through the officer recommendation, please?
So the officer recommendation is to approve the application subject to the conditions on page 111 and 112 of the report.
Okay, in that case, can I ask to see those who are for moving the officer recommendation? And those who are against? And those who have abstained, which is none. So the officer recommendation isn't moved at this time. And I would seek from the group proposals for what you would like to move. Five in favour of not moving the officer recommendation, not approving, sorry, approving. I'll do my terminology afterwards. So I think we're in a position now where we need to invite discussion around what we actually do now in terms of proposals from the group. Councillor Hollier.
So I might be right that there would have been there is a majority for approval. There's just a difference of opinion on condition 4. Because I think Councillor Melly abstained. So perhaps propose deferring subject to clarification. What, sorry, condition 4 should have been.
I'm
Gareth, that's,
I'm on the basis that I'm the development manager, I'd say what's in the condition 4 is what was intended.
but the alternative is we'll end up refusing it.
Well, then that's in members' hands, isn't it? If you feel that a condition which seeks to limit the number of bedrooms would be sufficient to mitigate against the car parking issue that the condition is intended to try and solve, then that's a decision for you to make, and that's as reasonable a decision as my recommendation.
I think Councillor. Oh, right, yeah, because you're on this point. Yes, I'll come to you first, Councillor.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to clarify because also paragraph 5.10 provides an explanation of why it's being limited to 4 future occupants, which is about the internal layout. It's about adequate internal and external amenity space. It says that it will meet the need of 4 future occupants. It's not just parking, but also amenity space.
No, I think that is because the car parking through just the way the report is set out, the recommendation it's already got to the point where the recommendation is saying this is reasonable for 4 people. I think that's that's not saying there would be inadequate amenity space for more than 4. It's just saying it's all right because we're already saying it's 4. I think that's maybe a step further than the intention of the report.
So we don't have a view from officers or anyone about whether there's adequate amenity space for 6 people.
My view is and I think the officer's view is that there would be adequate amenity space for 6 in terms of the size of the garden, size of the property. There's nothing that leaps out and says that there's an amenity issue there. I mean, there's no set standards under planning policies for that, but judgment would say that's reasonable for 6.
Councillor Waters is next.
Well, let's just test the other thing then. Let's move refusal on the grounds that it's detrimental to the overall residential amenity of the area. As Gareth will no doubt back up, there's been a number of appeal cases where inspectors have picked up on the fact that in cul-de-sacs, the noise issue is amplified by people having to walk past where everybody lives. In particular, this application site at the end of that cul-de-sac, you've got the noise issues, you've got the car parking issues, you've also got the potential noise issues of it having 4 common garden boundaries at the rear. And of course, the impact on the streets, or the potential impact on the street scene, which is the tree. I'm sure there's enough there to cobble together as reasonable grounds for refusal. And again, I don't see that there's any problem with taking these to appeal if need be.
Just on the tree issue, there is no proposal for I don't think you could run a refusal reason when there's no proposal. But again, that wouldn't, I'd say that wasn't strong enough to form a refusal reason if there's nothing inherent in what's in front of us that says that tree is going to be removed. The other issues, they are all issues related to HMOs and the cul-de-sac location. The difficulty with refusing an HMO when it's below the thresholds is our policy is all about mitigating against harmful concentrations. So if it's below the threshold, it's already, you don't have that concentration issue that we normally hang refusal reasons on. You're effectively saying there is no concentration, therefore this is going to be harmful because it's a noise impact or it potentially is a noise impact where one doesn't exist at the moment, and that's it's not a strong ground.
It would have been if the thresholds had been halved.
Yeah, well, yeah.
No, of course, the applications have to be determined based on the policies as they are, and thresholds as they exist, not what members may wish them to be. And as Gareth says, members must be careful of not straying into sort of speculation over what might be amenity impacts and what might turn into unreasonable speculation.
Yeah, the policy does have in subsection 3. The policy does have that. It does refer to detrimental impacts on residential amenity, which is a separate. This is separate to the thresholds. Yeah.
Let me just check which bit of 2.9 there. Page. SPD, yeah. Yeah. Okay.
You shouldn't just pull a single paragraph out of. You need to read the SPD as a whole, but that part of the SPD is then repeated in merging policy 8 in that subsection 3, which I read out just then, about detrimental impacts on residential amenity. But yeah, I wouldn't just hone into paragraph 2.9 and say that means we can refuse it.
Councillor Bassey.
And Chair, just to amplify a fraction, paragraph 5.7 sets out for us very clearly that an HMO is not another type of house. I have no problems with HMOs personally, but this paragraph explains that the use of such a property is different. A family with children is different to a group of adults. The likelihood of not being able to access a car because someone's not there, the problems of on-street parking. 5.7 explains for me why it corroborates my misgivings. This is a cul-de-sac, narrow street, no real possibility for off-street parking. That directly feeds into, as Councillor Orrell says, the paragraph about residential amenity of the area. And for me, that's the key issue. And it's there in
Right.
the report.
My one issue with this is that lots of houses in Osbaldwick that aren't HMOs have more than 2, 3, 4 cars in their driveway, and I don't think HMOs are likely to have more cars than a student. Than a family house in a lot of these areas that are in out of town. So I'm not sure there's an expectation that HMOs are going to have lots of cars. Is a hold up in some ways, because it could, without having a change of use, it could still have 5 cars. And actually, a lot of people have that many cars in the area, so it's hard to say you can have 4 cars, 3 cars. Sorry, I'm going to go to Councillor Fisher first.
Thank you, Chair. I feel very worried about having any refusal on car parking. This meets our criteria for the car parking, which is 1 car for every 2 bedrooms. Now, it may have more than that, but that says basically that our criteria, our policy on car parking is inadequate. And I don't think we can actually refuse this on the grounds of car parking and say it's going to displace parking into the street. I just don't see how will stand up on appeal.
Councillor Waters.
Yeah, just in relation to what you were saying about potential car parking if it was a family home. A family home is 1 family unit, whereas HMO, well, this one in particular, before possibly 6 independent people living as independent households, becomes a lot more difficult to manoeuvre cars about and get some form of cooperation than it does with a family unit where there's access to car keys and such like. It's a world of difference.
Okay. So far, we've had the proposal from Councillor Waters, although I think we might need to refuse it, but I think we might need to tighten up the language because things around the trees, potential trees probably aren't suitable to go on a refusal. However, we have had a proposal to refuse. I don't know if anyone... We need to tighten that up first, or can we see a second and see if anyone wants to?
Well, I've given my comments in terms of the impacts on the tree. The other issues are relevant to the use of a property as an HMO. I don't. My comments were in how strong they were, but they're not irrational.
Okay. Has anyone got an alternative that they'd like to propose in terms of refusal, or would anyone like to second? Councillor Wise, seconded. Okay. I think some of us feel what this potentially might look like, although I'm sure you can satisfy the wording afterwards.
So that was the refusal reason would be the proposed change of use is detrimental to residential amenities of the area, given the cul-de-sac location and the location of the property at the end of the cul-de-sac, resulting in noise and disturbance.
Being magnified,
Being magnified. And then the issue of inadequate car parking and the issue of independent parking spaces and the lack of availability of off-street parking in the street, and that all being a detrimental impact on residential amenity.
So, based on that, I can see those people raise their hands. Who's for that? Yeah, for the approved recommendation, sorry, to refuse. Yeah, for refusal. And those who are against. And those who abstain. Okay. So. Okay, we're going to take a brief pause for 2 minutes while we discuss what we do next. where we have had the recommendation, officer's recommendation was not carried over. The recommendation to refuse based on the reasons outlined before has also not been carried. So we're now in a position that we need to find alternative solutions that can be put forward to a vote again. Whether that is different reasons for refusal or whether that is a different reason for approval, or if it's someone's a proposal to defer the application, although that should be on strong grounds. So I'm seeking people's thoughts on how they, to be honest, in some ways, I think it may be useful for people to put forward their thoughts on where they stand on this more generally. I think that might help kind of why people are holding one position or holding another one. Sorry, Councillor Waters, you can start.
The thought I'd like to give, and obviously I'm not privy to your discussion and your horse trading outside, but the thought I'd like to give is this business of detrimental to local amenity and the local community. Because I don't know how many of you actually looked on the planning file for this application, but to say it's a small cul-de-sac, there was an amazing amount of objections, not only from within the cul-de-sac, but from surrounding properties that had common garden boundaries. And you need to be asking yourselves why. Why do people think that these properties are so detrimental to their local amenity? I know why, because I've dealt with them for donkey's years. I've dealt with anything from drug death overdoses, serious sexual assaults, to the usual run-of-the-mill parking disputes, rubbish disputes, and what is probably the biggest worry for most people, especially in this little cul-de-sac, is the noise and disturbance. The noise and disturbance that you get from HMOs that live totally different lives from working people. And if it's not a sensible and supported reason for refusal, this level of disturbance that causes this detrimental impact on people's amenity, then I think it's time we all give up. So yeah, I'll be very interested to see what other proposals are put forward.
Just to add, it hasn't been stressed enough that this is a very small cul-de-sac, tiny number of houses, so the impact is much greater when the impacts are not spread wider as they are on a main road or a bigger street.
Yeah, and Councillor Fisher.
Thank you. I think we should remember that planning is not a popularity contest. Any judgment as to refuse must be based on policy. I also find it very strange to say that the habits of people in HMOs are different from working people, because lots of the people who occupy HMOs in that area are students. And I know for a fact I spent 6 years as a student and I worked damned hard for my degree. So I take some exception to describing students as not being working people. I cannot see a valid reason to refuse this application. I can see lots of reasons why I don't like it, but I don't think it will hold up in policy terms at appeal. And so I'm afraid I'll leave it to others to propose something. I mean, we saw that Councillor Melly was prepared to accept the deletion of clause 4, notwithstanding the provisions of the Town and Country Planning uses class 987 should be no more than 4 tenants of the proposed house in multiple occupation. Now, actually, I'd like that to be kept. So there's a slight difference there. So if we delete that, it may mean that Councillor Melly can vote for it, but I don't think I could.
Councillor Hall, yeah. Thank you.
I don't think it was deleting it. It was to change it to 4 bedrooms instead of 4 tenants. So I think what would help me is a bit more clarity around what exactly that should say and what the recommendation, I suppose, because earlier when we discussed it, Gareth said that 4 would be the stronger condition, which is probably in a sense why it was supported, but it's whether that is what should be there or whether it should be 4 bedrooms.
So 4 bedrooms would follow Appendix E of the 2005 plan, which sets that as a maximum standard, which is not in accordance with the MPPF. So it was only ever an appendix anyway. It was never a policy. It was a parking standard, and it doesn't have a great deal of weight, but it's all we have in terms of our standards guidelines for parking, and we apply it when we look at the circumstances, that are pertaining to any particular case. The concern is, of course, that because this could be occupied as under C4 for 6 occupants, then having a condition that says 4 bedrooms doesn't actually change the situation, potentially, in terms of whether you didn't have that condition at all, because the 4 bedrooms could still be occupied by up to 6 residents, which is why the 4 tenants probably gives you greater security in terms of mitigation of the potential overspill parking from the site. But that's a planning judgment call. And it doesn't, there's no policy to hang that on, because there's no policy that says that, other than the wording in the policy which talks about residential amenity, and then the explanation of the policy which talks about sufficient space for potential additional cars to park.
And Chair, could I, if I may, Chair, I know I'm presumably, Gareth, question to you from me. I'm thinking presumably as well is that condition 4 limiting to 4 tenants, obviously that would address the parking issue, but presumably as well, if there are 4 tenants, it addresses other concerns there may be about potential amenity impacts from the numbers of people coming and going. So it doesn't only address parking issues, but other potential impacts that members have been discussing and expressed concern about, because the 4 people is a relatively small household compared to 6, for example.
Well, yes, it would. That wasn't the intention of it, but it does have that. It does have that effect as well.
So sorry. So if it was changed to 4 bedrooms, would the report as written up to that point support? You'd be confident that the assessment of the application would support 4 bedrooms rather than 4 tenants, I suppose.
Not entirely sure. So,
the original question from Councillor Melly, I got the implication that the tenants thing perhaps was a mistake, or we weren't sure where it had come from or why it had changed in the report, which was why there was a suggestion that could be 4 bedrooms. But we weren't sure that the report supported that, which is why I didn't support 4 bedrooms. Well, we seem to be saying it could be either way.
I think maybe what Councillor Hollier is asking is, suppose condition 4 were amended to say 4 bedrooms, would you still support the application if there could be 6 tenants in this property? Is that what you're?
Yeah.
is that not really a question? Because
because you're recommending 4 tenants. But if members were to change it to 4 bedrooms, meaning there could be 6 occupants.
that's not that, but that's not my. It's not my role, is it?
No,
to
it's
say
not.
that still.
No, but I think that's what
my
Councillor
role
is
would be
asking.
to my.
Yes.
not to give an opinion, whether that change would be supported by what's in the report up to that point, or whether there wouldn't be the evidence in the report, or it hasn't been assessed on that basis.
I think if it was 4 bedrooms, then there is the potential there for additional cars, because there is the potential for more tenants. But we have to look at these things reasonably, and the likelihood that it's going to be that 4 bedrooms are going to be occupied by 6 people. It is that likely? Does it happen very often? I don't have the evidence to say that how many HMOs are occupied by more people than the bedrooms available. I guess it may undermine, given the number of rooms that are in the property. If you're saying it can be occupied by 6, then it doesn't really matter how many bedrooms are occupied, I would have thought.
Yeah. Right. I'm going to move to Councillor Waters, who's trying to speak.
Yeah, I just wanted to assist. I don't know where all this has come about, saying that it's a mistake that it says occupants instead of tenants instead of bedrooms. It was actually requested by Highways Development Control, Emma Leonard. It's there on the planning file. She's requested that as a condition because the car parking is so critical. And not only that, by saying 4 tenants, it also, I would have hoped, prevents the place being extended in the future, or any potential extension in the future, for 6 bedrooms.
Yeah.
It was very cleverly done by Highways Development Control, and I was pleased to actually see it reach the report, so that there is no suggestion that it's been a mistake in how it's been written.
Yeah, I agree. Councillor Melly.
Thank you, Chair. I don't think we have reasonable grounds to defer this. I don't think there's more information that we need to obtain to be able to determine this application. I don't think that there are grounds for refusal. I think the only acceptable in planning terms outcome is approval. The reason why I didn't vote for approval before was because I just didn't think that this one condition was reasonable or necessary or had a basis in policy, but we do need to determine the application today, in my view, and I do support approval. So if there isn't support for approving it, limiting the number of bedrooms instead of the number of tenants, then I think that approving it in a way that does have majority support is the way to go. So I'm happy to repropose. Not happy. I will repropose the officer recommendation. Yeah, I don't agree with that one condition, but I do agree with the recommendation to approve. So I will go ahead and propose the officer recommendation as outlined in the report.
Sorry, Councillor Bassey, you've been waiting to speak. So.
Thank you, Chair. We've been hearing that the reason it says 4 tenants and not 4 bedrooms is because of concerns that Highways had, if I've understood correctly, about the way in which this application, if approved, could impact on traffic, on residential amenity. I don't associate myself with comments denigrating or making any suggestion that students are anything like the rest of us. I've been one myself. My kids have been students recently. But I note within the representations a couple of other things about refuse collection vehicles and emergency vehicles access. And that too makes me think about a development in my ward where lack of car parking facilities, opportunities outside a whole range of small houses has resulted in considerable problems in terms of access for vehicles because it's a very narrow street. And from my perspective, what I see as our function here is, yes, we're presented with all the rules, all the laws. We're also the soul of this process. We're the people who are elected by residents to represent them and just think of them in the round. And I just look at this, as I say, I have absolutely no problem with HMOs as a concept. I have a problem with this particular application because of the narrowness of the access, the fact that it's a small cul-de-sac. And I worry about what happens when particular events can occur, where confrontation could take place, where access could be blocked off, all things that none of us would want to see. And just last year, a fire engine came to the house next to me because a fire broke out. We live in a cul-de-sac, but the road is wide enough for two cars or for a car and a vehicle to pass easily. I worry about this because there are those events that can cause confusion and chaos for people. That's why I put my hand up for refusal, and I'm still concerned. I'm not hearing, I hear all the rules and everything else. I'm not convinced yet that we're applying that part that we bring as councillors of being mindful of residents in a particular place, not a general point in this particular place. So I'm still minded to refuse, I have to say.
I'm happy to second Councillor Mendes' proposal.
Okay. Are we happy to take a vote as it's worded currently? That's correct, isn't it?
Well, Chair, my understanding was that Councillor Melly did move the officer recommendation with the conditions as set out in.
Yeah, that's right. Well, no, we just, Okay, on that basis, do we need to go back through? It's probably best to read the recommendation again.
Okay, so the officer recommendation is that the application be approved, subject to the conditions on page 111 and 112 of the agenda.
Okay. So, can I see hands for those who are for the recommendation? And can I see hands for those who are against the recommendation? And can I see hands for those who abstain? So based on that, the recommendation is passed and that is approved. Moving on, that is the final application on today's agenda. There isn't any other urgent business today, so in that basis we will call the meeting to a close and I'll thank everyone for their time, which there was